Hello there, and welcome back to another devlog. This is number 19. Uh, I was working on Monday on continuing work on the FPS issues I was seeing with the main character controller, specifically diving down in the profiler. In so I was looking for it's not this light blue, it's not this green, or it's not this dark blue. It was actually a light blue. You can really tell what's going on with your own code by seeing the light blue markings. That's where your own code is. That's where you're responsible. Everything else is kind of out of your control, like the render loop editor, blah blah blah. But I had a big problem with most specifically the input manager. Not mine, not but what it's built on top of the Invector system. So I had to kind of really drill down and refactor this class. I'll talk more about that later, but I eventually found out that it's not my class, it's the underlying Invector class that was causing the problem, but more on that later. Um, while I was testing and I was refactoring and trying to get to the bottom of the issue, I I actually added another test because I broke a lot of functionality with shooting and equipping uh, because it gets processed during the update loop. So I decided to add another test, another not just one basic test class, but another one alongside it. And this kind of exposed problems with my code and the setup for running multiple test classes. Specifically, the way I initially had it set up, like an amateur, beginner. I was not, I wasn't using the actual right tags in order to actually do proper scene loading, setup, and teardown per test. So I had kind of had to go and research, how to do this properly, for each test, setup and teardown in order to kind of remove the dependencies and carry over the other dependencies like the game manager from test to test. And I was able to put that together in order to run multiple tests. So that took some figuring out and get it working right. So now I'm able to run a whole test suite from top to bottom or run each test individually without one affecting the other. So that's what I had to. So now I can add a lot more test classes in the future and follow the same structure and setup as an example. Um, right now this one's broken, but the shooting test, if I can actually run this one, it works pretty good. Just run this single class as an example of running 3 cases, and it will basically build on top of itself. One is just the aiming, the other is aiming and shooting. Not sure. And then the last one is actually something else. But anyways, that works right. And so I got all that figured out and learned a bunch more about unit testing along the way. Once that was fixed, I went back to kind of diving down in deconstructing the actual update function all the way down and breaking a lot of things along the way, trying to drill down and isolate each method that the update method called, whether it's invoking events or whatever, and try to comment that out and see if that improved the framework or not. I eventually isolated the problem on Tuesday down to an issue with Invector. Basically, like I said before, Invector is not perfect, and what was happening was there was a call in the input manager. Basically, it is the fault of Invector is it assumes that you're running your game not as a top down, but as like a third person controller with an aim canvas. And basically on the update loop, every update it would go and say, try to find the object in the scene, the aim canvas, and that's expensive, especially if you're doing it every single time. So most of the problems revolved around that, just removing that and adding behavior to overwrite that behavior so it doesn't do that anymore. It solved my problems, and I went from the update method going from like 4 milliseconds down to where it should be sub-0 milliseconds. Like it's like if you get it down to 0.1 or 0.01, then that's perfect. You don't want anything above 1 millisecond, especially for your own code. That shouldn't be right. Something is going on if it's not really heavy, but it's above 1 millisecond. There's something going on. So, and you can kind of pick out any other methods that are causing, taking up more resources than they should. Another one was I had to go to the spider bot and add a tick method instead of every update the vision cone every frame, do it every 10 frames. So little optimizations, but eventually got those issues sorted out. I took a stab at setting up Unity's build pipeline. What that means is I can, when I push something to main, it's supposed to automatically run a build and run your tests alongside it. I think that'd be convenient, just so I can periodically run my tests and not have to manually run my tests. It's good. It's better for doing that with teams. Have frequently build automation. So I set that up and it works. It was relatively painless to set it up, but for some reason the tests failed. And now thinking back, I think it's because my scene manager, when I actually saved the revision into the repo, the scene manager wasn't set up for unit test, and it didn't include the proper unit testing scenes, so it can't actually load the scenes. So I just got to be aware of that. Maybe I'll try again, but I think that was the problem. So with all that done and the FPS issues solved, I went back to looking about how I can do XR controller. The main goal is to make XR menus, right? I have a pause menu, start, main menu, end screen, and they're all 2D standard, but if you're going to make an XR game, you have to make the menus XR, like VR UI, right? So it can't be a screen space overlay, a simple screen space overlay with most games. It has to be, the VR UI has to be a different type of UI. It has to exist in the scene, basically. So I went and set up another bit of UI that's attached to the XR origin, basically duplicating the standard pause menu UI. But before I did that, I wanted to test it out. I wanted to, I think when I'm doing builds, I'm going to need an FPS counter, and I'm going to need that in the headset while I'm testing inside the headset. So I want to see that on the headset, on the screen headset while I'm moving around, while I'm testing in a build, right? So that means I have to add some VR UI, simple, non-interactable VR UI to the actual camera of the of the VR headset, and I was able to do that. So the first crack at going back in my amateur knowledge of how to work with XR VR UI, I was able to do that. So if I could run this here, let's see. It's going to be interesting now to demo these things now that the game is moving more towards a VR setup, but I can still kind of show you how it looks. So it's a different method of starting up the app. It'll boot into the headset now, and the actual XR functionality is a lot more take a little bit to boot up here, but while that does that, we'll continue the discussion. Am I hitting a... hitting some sort of random error here. I haven't seen this one before. Anyways, let's see if I can clear this and get this running. The headset running here. There he goes. So basically, you can see the headset moving now, and now you can see the controllers moving. That's great. That's all set up. So I can now pull up the... And I moved it over a little bit so you can see it, but this is actually on the headset. So when you're moving, it's on the camera. So when you're moving around, you can see the FPS VR UI in world space, and you can see it inside the headset, inside of a build. So I got that working. It's non-interactable, but it's just a demonstration. Okay, that's how you put UI in a VR application. That's great. I'll show you that later. Let's see. And then I was thinking about, okay, I'm moving over to XR. I need to figure out, I'm using the gamepad. So basically the difference between the gamepad and the XR, you don't have the D button and an extra start button. Everything else you can kind of use the same layout as the gamepad, and I can still map and keep the gamepad for testing and convenience when I don't need to test inside the headset. But things like testing VR UI, I have to test inside the headset. There's no other way. I can't simply test in the standard way. So for most things, if I'm just testing gameplay and stuff, I don't have to use the headset, but for other things, I have to test it in the headset. So a lot of testing this week inside the headset. And so along the way, I'd like to share also that I've been using this new thing. I've had it here for a while, but you know, I've been starting to use this more and more, asking AI, doing AI queries, and this is actually proving to be a real useful tool. Previously in my whole software career, in order to find an issue, I have to go to Google, search through threads, and it would take me about 15-30 minutes to actually find the relevant information I'm looking for, to actually lead me to the problem and solve the problem. So that research time really adds up. But I found that 90% of the time, if I'm specific about the question, it'll understand the context and it'll point me right to the area. Like, I get really close to the problem, and it really cuts down on solving issues that I never solved before. Or some of these examples, it's like, how do I, where's the setting or the configuration? You just go to you know, oh, you go to project settings, this tab, this field, it'll point you right there instead of trying to dig through yourself or find it. You know, it's actually a real helpful tool that I'm actually using more and more, and it's actually helping me solve some real tough problems that I would spend a lot more time trying to figure it out, you know, with like Stack Overflow or any or other sort of thread or forum. So just wanted to mention that, but that's like my new go-to now. It's like you know, I put it over web searches now. So moving into Wednesday, um, I had some issues doing a build on the first VR UI. For some reason, the FPS counter it was only rendering in one eye, which is strange. And it was just some setting. Again, AI helped me solve this problem. It's like, why is this only rendering in one eye? Like, oh yeah, you just have to go to this setting and set it from single pass to multipass is right here. You know, something that would take me half an hour to figure out. It just pointed me right to it and I fixed it. So I also learned along the way that this little counter that I did, it's actually possible to do the same thing. Instead of attaching it to the camera directly, you can actually do a setting to, instead of screen space UI, you can actually do, yeah, instead of world space, you can actually do screen space camera and pretty much do the same thing. I gotta test that out, but that's, you know, apparently what that's for. Also, when I'm doing the build, I found that if you look at the, what is it, the editor, no, the quality. Yeah, so if you have multiple quality settings, I had this at this VR low at the top just for testing. It'll actually take this one and use it off the build. So I was like, why are the graphics look different? Well, it actually takes the first one. So if you switch this one, it'll actually do the same thing. That's actually what it's set to in the editor. Just a side note. It was interesting. You learn a lot of interesting behaviors as you go along. But anyways, I was able to so I was able to do that this thing here. Go in here. So the FPS counter is working great. I needed, so next I needed to make the pause menu in the VR menus, but in order to do that, I'd have to be able to interact with them with the XR controllers. So I had to set up the XR input. And I was doing some testing, and for some reason my VR clean project was crashing now. I didn't know why. There's something weird. With a lot of testing, it didn't like DirectX 11, and finally, you know, switching that to 12 stopped the crashes, but it was just something I had to do a lot of testing for. Along the way, now I'm testing in the headset, I'm getting a lot of, I was getting a lot of weird intermittent, you know, some, you know, without the headset, it would run, you know, a clean 90 frames per second. That's great. But sometimes when you boot up the IDE, you know, it'll chug along at 15, or sometimes it goes up to like 40 to 50. You know, 40 to 50 you can still do testing, but when it's at 15, it's impossible. It's impossible to test reliably. A lot of odd things happen. So just messing around with it, I figured that if you either like reload the scene or restart the IDE or even restart the computer or do like layout switching here, it actually helps and resolves it. But it's just, you know, you got to have it above a certain frame rate. But it just takes a lot more resources to run the editor alongside the headset. So it's just something that I've been running into. It doesn't run at a clean 90 frames a second anymore, but that's fine. But the thing is, when you test it in the build, you know, you get like a 70 frames per second, no problem. It's pure editor overhead. So it's just something I have to deal with doing an XR game. Um, so back to XR input. It's funny because I encountered this problem a very long time ago with trying to get the gamepad joystick and the XR joystick working at the same time. I would get issues with movement control. There would be a conflict, and we talked about this a long time ago. It seems like a long time ago. But essentially, there's this conflict. Or doing the reads, it would read the right value when you input it on the XR joystick, but it would actually right after that it would report 0, 0 again. So it would sort of move, but then it would result in no movement. And for the darndest thing, I had to tackle this issue and solve it this time. So, you know, some sort of weird system thing. No idea what's going on. Eventually, what solved it, going into Thursday, was headset's going again. Let's see if I can get this running. Here we go. Eventually what solved it, I had to go and do a clean scene, a basic nothing scene with just the character controller, and then I had to rebuild the input actions control scheme again from the ground up, just focusing on, you know, one thing, the left-hand move direction. Okay, that works. Okay, now try this thing. Okay, you know, testing step by step by step by step until finally it's built back to where it was with all the inputs. But basically just getting the there was some weird system thing. I don't know if it's, you know, because I copied and pasted from another one or something weird, but just doing a clean build, you know, just basically pointing to it manually, it solved the issue, and now I don't have any more movement conflicting issue. So it wasn't at the end of the day, it wasn't in vector that was causing the conflict. It was just some weird action map issue that, you know, I had to deconstruct the entire system in order, you know, the entire map, and start from the beginning in order to get it working right. So just one of those things. I tested out the device simulator again, and that's a little tool that provides you the ability to kind of debug and see and control your controllers in the scene without having to use the headset. And so it's functional, but it's kind of a niche tool. You don't need to use the headset, but most of the time, like if you're testing VR UI, you have to test inside the headset. I don't really see a use for it except for like maybe unit testing, automated testing, maybe something else. But for right now, it's, you know, I'll either be testing if I don't need the headset just with a regular gamepad, or mostly just testing in the headset if I do need to test VR features like VR UI. So on Thursday, I was working on converting the standard pause menu into a World Space VR menu. So basically, I took the one I had, this pause menu already, and I applied what I did with the FPS counter, and I was able to convert that UI by doing a special. XR provides a UI canvas, and it has a couple extra features that allows you to do world actually, yeah, world space canvas. So if I can bring this up, so you can see what I have here. I have this. Here's the camera up here, and we have this UI that comes up, and you can see now I was able to convert the menu to a world space menu, and initially I had this transparent, but I decided to go with a 2D thing, but it had to kind of have a background that kind of darkened the whole scene. You kind of So a lot of testing. So I had to set up specifically with the game manager modes to say if you're in VR, use this UI instead of the other UI, things like that. So eventually, at the end of Thursday, I got the menu to kind of show and hide with the menu input, and this effect where it kind of controls the fade in, the fade out of the UI. So it's not just the stark on off. It actually fades in the color of the background. So you're basically, your camera's inside of a sphere, and you can get this as dark as you want to. And I had to invert the normals of a sphere, so you're actually, it renders on the inside, and you can actually, it's a transparency. So it'll bring up the menu when you're paused. Fun stuff. Friday, it was a tough challenge. I had to figure out how to do interactions with the XR controller. So I had my controllers, but I didn't have these line things. I didn't have any way to kind of, interact with UI. So I kind of had to do my research again. I kind of went through this before, a long time ago in my training courses, but for the life of me, I just couldn't get the darn thing to work with my existing UI origin. Either it was outdated or what, but like trying to set it up manually, there was some link in this complex chain of component network where it was just not allowing the input to actually work correctly. So once again, I went back to the drawing board. I set up a simple demo scene and built it from the ground up using the XR interaction demo, because they had controllers that actually worked and interacted with UI. So just building from the ground up, just testing out basic, trying to get the XR controller to, when you hover over an element, a button element, that it would do something, that it would be interacting, not in a, and then the next thing is selecting. So step by step, doing that to eventually I get it working fully in the scene. So now I can kind of demonstrate when you hover over, it'll actually highlight each one. Perfect. And then the next step, selection, and that's exactly what I want. But that was real tricky to figure out how to get it working and kind of update and refactor the XR origin prefab a little bit. So now you can actually, so we have our menus working in XR pretty much. The last challenge was the last step, not just point interaction and selecting with the trigger, but also setting up. So I had to figure out what was happening. Basically, what was happening that wasn't working before, I had this input system UI module that was allowing the gamepad controller to interact with the regular one, right? The regular pause menu, and that's fine, but there's a little caveat in the documentation that's saying if there's an event system and you add another one, this XR UI input module, they're not going to both work together. So basically this one was blocking this one, and I had no idea what was going on until I reconstructed the thing. So disabling this now allows for the XR input to work properly. But I couldn't figure out, like, how do you actually get not just a point interaction, but also how do you get normal like with a gamepad, you can click up and down and use the joystick to navigate the UI instead of, let's see if we can get back here. So let's see if I can, yeah. So but at the end of the day, it's not perfect. Like there's some issues, like if you select one of these and then go through, or select another one, you can select two at a time. Or if you select this one, the animation kind of jumps a little when it goes to the, so other things when you're going up and down. Let's see if I can. There's a couple little issues to. Let's see if I can get in here. Get in here. That's right. I have to restart this. But anyway, there's a couple little issues going on where it's not quite perfect. Like when you're navigating, it'll actually, like the problem before, it'll skip over elements improperly. So it's going to need a little more polish. But essentially the functionality is working there. It's functional, 90% functional. So more work, but this gives me a stepping stone to actually, the next step is to get the main menu working kind of like this in XR, right? So this was a big challenge this week, getting this working. Real technical struggle, but I accomplished a lot. And that's about all I have for this week. And we will tune out for now, and we'll check back with you later. Thanks. Goodbye.